welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture we are going to discuss on Elvin Goldner's reflexive sociology. Here the focus is to understand reflexibility in social science research, and we kind of will restrict our understanding of reflexive sociology to chapter 13 of Elvin Goldner's book Coming Crisis of Western Sociology. So, let us try to understand that what he means by reflexive sociology, and for that he is kind of understanding the way in which sociology as a discipline evolved. He kind of is critical of the theories in terms of the functionalism, Talcott-Parsons, the system theory, and helps us to understand that this effort towards morals kind of attempt to make a distinction between the normal and the deviant and to kind of be engaged is inherent in even in the classical sociological work. So, Goldner suggests that the fathers of academic sociology, think Comte, Spencer, Durkheim, Marx, Weber, etc., emerged during the positivist period, witnessing the rise of industrial society. So, in any kind of an understanding of the evolution or the origin of the discipline of sociology, we know that the initial phase in which sociology was being tried to be constructed as a science of society was the positive or the positivism. Why positivism? Because they were trying to understand society as it is in terms of facts, in terms of observed reality which could be compared and analyzed. The observation of these classical thinkers revealed a crucial tension as they recognized the immense undeniable power and transformative forces of the emerging industrial society. They saw in their theories the ability to reshape economy, population and social structure was evident. They had no doubt about its potency. So, they were suggestive of a moral order, and if we kind of go back to the reading of Marx, Weber, Durkheim, we see that they were all critical or they were concerned about the decline of order in society, the decline of moral order in society, and they were through the theory trying to offer solution to come back to the normative. However, they had profound concern about the goodness or morality. Industrialization brought with it new forms of inequality, alienation, social disorganization, and a perceived erosion of traditional moral framework. This disparity between the new society power and its moral standing created an unpermitted world in their minds. So, according to Goldner, there are two kinds of social reality, the permitted, which is the normal, and the unpermitted, which is the abnormal. So, when they are looking into this shift from say peasant agrarian society to industrial society, they were kind of witnessing the creation of an unpermitted world, and this unpermitted world was powerful but morally questionable industrial society. And most of the intellectual project of this period were targeted towards this idea of bringing back to normal, bringing back the lost morality, bringing back the order in society which was there in the pre-industrial society. So, they implicitly and sometimes explicitly, like Auguste Comte with its religion of humanity, saw a need for a new moral and religious framework to guide this powerful but ethically adrift society. So, if we read Emile Durkheim, Elementary Forms of Religious Life, he is also trying to argue that there is a decline of moral collectivity in the society, and is comparing it to the Australian Aborigine, where the collectivity through the totem was the highest. And in his theory of collective consciousness, he is trying to focus on the moral order of the society. Crucially, these thinkers offered science in general and social science in particular as the means to discover and legitimate the new morality. Sociology, in this view, wasn't just about describing it, it was about providing the moral grounding for the new social order. And here, the most important, when it comes to morality in terms of moral order, the most important category that becomes significant in sociology is the middle class. So, the dilemma of the middle class and sociology role. The new middle class, the driving force behind industrial society, gained immense economic and political power. However, they struggled to achieve full moral legitimacy, challenged goodness in the eyes of other social strata, that is, the old aristocracy, the new working class, and the intellectual. They were seen as powerful but perhaps not rightful or morally superior. Goldner implies that academic sociology offered intellectual framework to justify their dominance and the new social order they championed. Goldner outlines three key ways in which social theorists and academic sociology accommodated to these unpermitted world. And what was this unpermitted world? The powerful but morally problematic reality. Intimating the goodness of the powerful, this is the first way forms of accommodation to the unpermitted world. This is what functionalists like Talcott Parsons primarily do. They demonstrate that social objects or institutions that survive, are powerful, have an ongoing usefulness. So, if you go back to functionalism or read Talcott Parsons, there was a justification for the powerful. They were kind of considered as useful and having a functional role in society. In a society that values efficiency and productivity, to be useful is to be good. So, industrial society was the hallmark of efficiency and productivity. So, they were kind of class based society where technology and efficiency were the key words. To be useful was supposed to be normative. If something is powerful and persists, functionalism explains how it contributes to the system's stability and survival, thereby implicitly or explicitly affirming its goodness or positive role. This effectively sanitizes the unpermitted aspect by framing them as necessary for systematic function. For example, a functionalist might analyze economic inequality not as an injustice but as a useful mechanism for motivating talent and filling essential roles, thus legitimizing a powerful but morally ambiguous social structure. Theorists emphasize the empirical importance and influence of said moral norms, values, and cultural agreement. If good values are shown to be powerful drivers of social order and stability, then the system, despite its imperfection, is ultimately guided by these positive forces. And here Goldner gives the example from Talcott Parsons' concept of shared norms. Talcott Parsons' strong emphasis on shared moral norms and value as the bedrock of social order suggests that even with the unpermitted aspect of industrial society, consensus and integration hold it together and guides its evolution. So, in a way, the theory of Talcott Parsons was justifying the unpermitted social reality, and therefore he is saying what theory was doing was transforming this unpermitted reality to permitted realities. This was a strategy of value free society. They declare the making value judgment is outside the purview or competence of social sciences. By removing explicitly moral evaluation from the academic discourse, they avoid directly confronting the goodness or lack thereof of powerful but morally ambiguous social realities. Goldner argues this is a crucial way for academic sociologists to accommodate to living in an unpermitted world. If the world is powerful but morally problematic, proclaiming value freedom allows them to study it without having to directly condemn or endorse its moral status. So, that is what Goldner is saying or giving us an explanation of why the positivist or the functionalist was supportive of value free judgment. So, because they were kind of indirectly not wanting to question it, not wanting to question the ambiguous, and therefore they took a easier way of advocating value free sociology. It provided them a comfortable intellectual distance from uncomfortable moral dilemmas, enabling them to operate within the powerful institution of that unpermitted world without explicitly challenging its ethical foundation. By unveiling this underlying mechanism of accommodations, Goldner calls upon sociologists to become critically reflexive. Goldner stated that academic sociology adopts various forms of avoidance when confronted with the unpermitted world, particularly the stark reality of power without legitimacy. He pulls together several threads of his critique, demonstrating how these avoidance strategies ultimately serve to normalize rather than challenge uncomfortable social truth. He zeroes in on the value fuse strategy as a means of avoiding tension by denying responsibility for coping with the dissonance between perceived reality and violated values. So, here he will then kind of look into the example of the liberal sociologists and how they tried to ignore or deprecate the significance of sheer power. So, what sheer power means: force, coercion, conspiracy, violence. And Goldner notes that liberal sociology has scarcely ever confronted the problem of war, either empirically or theoretically. This is a profound accusation suggesting that discipline ostensibly dedicated to understanding society has largely shied away from one of its most destructive and recurrent features. And then he goes on to review Talcott Parsons' redefinition of power. Goldner revisits his critique of Parson to illustrate the doing away with certain fact like war, conflict, and focusing more on the acceptable normative patterns. Talcott Parsons claimed to address the problems of power. However, he did so only by tactically redefining power as authority. Authority by definition implies legitimacy. By transforming power into authority, Parson essentially annoys it with rightful legitimacy. He makes the unpermitted world of raw, illegitimate power palatable by intellectually transforming it into a permitted world of sanctioned rightful influence. So, the two distinction between power and legitimacy would be the both are kind of could be creating a situation of violence or conflict, but power was kind of considered as unpermitted or abnormal, and when it was sanctified by the state or by the society, it becomes legitimate, it was converted or transformed into a permitted social reality. Goldner extends this critique to other prominent sociological figures of his time. Erving Goffman's symbolic interactionism, dramatical analysis, Harold Garfinkel's ethnomethodology, and George Hohmann's exchange theory. He argues that all of them, despite their different theoretical approaches, commonly avoid intellectual confrontation with the reality of sheer power. Goffman, perhaps by focusing on micro interaction and presentation of self, might obscure macro structures of power. Garfinkel, by emphasizing members' method for constructing social reality, might underplay the coercive forces that constrain that construction. Homans, by giving the exchange theory, focuses on voluntary exchange based on reward and cost, might sidestep non reciprocal dynamics. So, the common thread in Goffman, Garfinkel, and Homan is that these approaches, however valuable in their own right, offer framework that make it less necessary to directly confront the brute fact of power exercised without moral sanction. Goldner states that academic sociologists inherently strive to bring power and goodness into some form of equilibrium. This means they seek to reconcile the reality of who holds power with a perception of their morally righteousness. In a social world where people doubt the powerful are the good, this creates intense dissonance. To alleviate this discomfort, sociologists employ various strategies. And the first strategy is avoidance of the reality of power, downplaying, ignoring, or redefining the existence of raw, illegitimate power. So, they are not discussing, they are not talking about it, they are avoiding. The second strategy is avoidance of value judgment. This is value free. So, they do not want to discuss about the judgment, value judgment, whether the use of power is good, bad, how it is going to impact. They are kind of doing away with it by giving the commandment that sociology is value free. Value free stands where sociologists declare themselves incompetent to make moral assessment, thus sidestepping the tension between power and goodness. Sociology that emerges is warped, losing both its empirical realism. It does not accurately reflect the world as it is. So, it is only focusing on the goodness, it is only focusing on one side of the reality. Therefore, the interpretation is incomplete, and its moral sensitivity. The concern becomes as they are the moral guide they are setting moral guidelines by just looking into the goodness part. The badness part has been completely shadowed, or what is not necessarily kind of discussed is anything which would be having a value judgment, which would kind of interpret how it is going to affect the reality. So, basically it fails to address fundamental ethical concern. And that is the reason why Goldner says that the theory made by the sociologist is a man in all his wholeness. The fundamental assumption underlying his critique is that these theories are made by a man in all his wholeness. This means that sociologists' personal experiences, value, psychological needs, and social positions are not incidental to the intellectual world, but are integral extra-scientific forces that shape their theories. Goldner isn't asserting that the power goodness dynamic is the only or even the most significant force shaping theory. Instead, it presented a case study to demonstrate the productivity of starting from his holistic view of the theorist. And so, he had a larger project. He is not just kind of concerned whether sociologists are talking about the goodness or about power, but he was in kind of had a larger vision in terms of looking in terms of the task that sociologist as could provide. And there in that wider vision, he criticized the discipline that has and by and large shied away from confronting uncomfortable truth about power and morality. By avoiding these tensions, sociology compromises its very integrity, becoming less attuned to reality and less capable of ethical judgment. Goldner's ultimate message is a profound call for sociologists to engage in radical self awareness. They must acknowledge that the theories are not born in a vacuum, but are deeply rooted in their personal experiences, values, and a human impulse. So, what he is trying to tell us is that we need to go beyond the theories of social theories, and this he terms as the sociology of sociology. Goldner urges sociologists to confront their own biases and the often unacknowledged motivation behind their pursuit of knowledge. Goldner clarifies that his immediate concern with how social theories are made, which we have been discussing in the lecture, is only segment of a much larger intellectual commitment. He is not interested in the internal logic or development of theory. He wants to understand the entire discipline of sociology itself as a complex social and cultural phenomena. He sees social theory as just one element in his intellectual apparatus of sociology. This intellectual apparatus, that is theories, concepts, method, is in turn only a part of sociology viewed as a social and cultural system. This means examining sociology as an institution, a profession, a community of scholar, a producer of knowledge with cultural impact and its relationship with power structure. To clearly delineate his unique approach to this larger sociology of sociology, Goldner gives it a specific name, and that is reflexive sociology. So, entire project of Goldner is been termed as reflexive sociology, and then in the part of this chapter, he tells us what are the strategies or the steps towards a reflexive sociology. Goldner acknowledges a fundamental human and professional tendency among sociologists to resist self scrutiny. Sociologists are just reluctant as anyone else to critically examine their own action, motivation, and the gap between their ideals and their actual practices. Professional courtesy, guild interest, protecting the professional image, and the pity, that is blind loyalty to established norms, actively suppress intellectual curiosity and truth telling within the discipline. This creates a barrier to genuine self reflection. Despite this resistance, Goldner asserts that reflexive sociology must concern itself with what sociologists want to do and with what, in fact, they actually do in the world. This is the essential starting point, and therefore he issues a crucial warning foreseeing how his radical idea might be neutralized. He anticipated and states he has already observed attempts to contain the impact of reflexive sociology by defining it as just one other technically speciality within sociology. So, basically we need to then kind of understand what reflexive sociology is not. He explicitly rejects this trivialization. It is not just one more specialization, not just another topic for panel meeting, and certainly not just another bubbling little stream of technical reports about the professional's demography, habits, or foibles. Simply producing these kinds of reports without deeper engagement can be deceptive. They might dead us to the disorder we bear and create an illusion of self confrontation that serves to disguise a new form of self celebration. In other words, studying themselves without critical intent can become narcissistic and avoid true accountability. So, the historical mission of reflexive sociology is basically transformation. Goldner laid out his ambition and transformative vision. The primary mission is not merely to study sociology, but to change the sociologists themselves. It must delve deeply into the everyday practices and intellectual habits of sociologists. It aims to foster a heightened awareness and ethical consciousness. This is about fundamentally altering how sociologists understand themselves, their craft, and their place in history. So, we have gone through the first few pages of chapter 13 towards reflexive sociology from Elvin Goldner's book Coming Crisis in Western Sociology to understand the debate between objectivity and subjectivity and what is basically the idea of doing social science research. It is important to read Goldner. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.